Well, welcome to this edition of the Weight Watchers Show. This is the third or fourth episode this year that we've done. I'm very happy to say that I'm here just 2 days after the King's speech in Westminster, where King Charles announced something called the Late Payments Bill, which has been a long time coming. It's a long time coming. We've been after that for 6 years now campaigning for it, but it's finally here. And what it means is that we're going to have in the UK the toughest payment regulations around late payment of anywhere in the world in the next 12 to 18 months. So for us in the campaigning world, a big week. And one of the sectors, of course, that has been talked about so often in the area of late payments and slow payments is construction. So I'm delighted that I've managed to capture on the Weight Watchers show finally, after trying for about a year, the wonderful Dan Foley from Kier, who is here today with us. Welcome to you, Dan.
Hi, Terry. Hi, everybody who's listening as well.
Now, the last time I saw Dan, he was picking up an award, and it was an award for being a fair payments leader at well, somewhere very grand in the city of London. I think it was Plasterers Hall, and it was given by Peter Kyle, who's our Secretary of State. So before I ask you about your role, actually, Dan, tell us about what that is. What is a fair payment leader?
I think it's all about doing the right thing in the payment sector, whatever industry you work in, Terry. It's about the integrity of doing the right thing, which often is the hardest thing to do, but ensuring basically that you do your best through processes, systems, ways of working, technology and non-technology ways to manage and pay your supply chain to terms. And also support them at times. They may need support as the times that they support you as well. But I go back, it's just doing the right thing on the end-to-end payment process. And it's about recognizing that, when you get awards, they're actually for a load of people behind the scenes who probably do most of the work in reality, Terry.
Well, we'll come back to that in a little while, Dan. But I want to ask you, first of all, and congratulations on that. Well
Thank you.
deserved, I must say.
Thank you so much.
Tell us a little bit about Kier, the construction company, and your role in Kier, please, Dan.
Yeah, so Kier basically in 2028 will be 100 years in existence. We are a tier one contractor in the United Kingdom, and we are responsible for infrastructure and constructions in the UK. We have about 11,000 employees across the UK, Terry. We turned over last year 4.1 billion, and our supply chain payments come to about £3 billion over that period as well. My role, I'm Finance Shared Service Director. I'm in my 15th year within the Kier organization. I was part of an organization, Michelle, that was acquired by Kier, and I'm responsible for cash in, invoicing and billing all of our cash to come to get our funds into the company, and then basically cash out. So I don't deal with payment of our employees, but I deal with all of the payment to the supply chain. And then basically, when we get our AR and AP ledgers to work correctly in that line, we get them into the GL. And so I've got a lot of responsibility on our financial accounting side. And we have a very strong focus on digital and technology, Terry, and we've really focused in on trying to maximize our efficiency and effectiveness within the shared service centre. We're based predominantly in Manchester, but we work one day a week in the office, and we have a hybrid agile working policy that's really worked for us since the COVID times. So 15 years in.
And you have, we were talking before we started that obviously you've got a lot of experience about payments that goes back even further than your days at Kia. So you've seen a lot of changes over the years. Now, I was giving a speech earlier this week at Accountex, a big
Yeah.
conference for all the accountants in London. And one of the things that I was talking about was I show a slide of some newspaper cuttings that say, let's deal with this problem of late payment. People are paying in 50 or 60 days. And I show these newspaper cuttings, and then I show the date of them, which is 1981, 1990, and 95. Now, so we're looking 40 years, here we are, 40 years later, and we've got all this technology to pay faster. You've been around this payments area for a very long time. Why do you think we still have this problem 40 years after, when we've got all these new technologies to pay faster?
Can I pick on the construction side, probably to make it in some ways to deal with it? I arrived in the UK in '85, Terry, as a whole, and I was working in construction in North London. And I didn't last too long, I must admit. But then I started working in pubs around where we were paying suppliers on Friday night, Saturday mornings. It was by checking the main, and then these were cashed across it all. I think technology is one core element of it all, but it's also trying to get the end-to-end process right. And that's, I think, whereby the real story of change has been. Technology is a great driver, but you have to have the end-to-end process to right. And at the end of the day, you have to have the cash profile to allow you to deal with it as well. And if those three items aren't in play, it's harder to get done. I think the other thing then, it's about doing the right thing. I keep coming back to that. You know, we have in Kier, like this morning, we are across 400 sites in the UK. We've got 11,000 staff ourselves, roughly speaking. And last year we paid 11,714 suppliers through it all. And 4,500 of those get paid monthly by us. So it's a fairly regular item there. And I think we're responsible for maybe, when you put all the supply chain staff together and our staff, it could be up to nearly 50,000 people. So keeping that in action, keeping it working is important for our client base, but it's also important for our people on the ground and the suppliers as well. And it's about doing the right things. And, you know, you go back, you said to 81, 85, 90. There are other industries that probably are more progressive than the construction industry. There are industries that may not have been focused on it, that are behind. But when I look at where we are, we've made significant progresses over that period of time, from when I was paying cash in North London to today, whereby this morning, you know, last month, 98% of our supply chain was paid in value within the terms of trade.
And you could have fallen in line, I guess, if that's the right phrase, back in the 80s or whenever it was, and said, let's just behave the way that sector has always behaved. To be frank, it didn't have a brilliant reputation in
No, it didn't.
construction for paying fast. What was it that made you sort of say, do you know, there's a better way of doing this, there's a right way of doing this? Where does that come from inside you to want to drive that change?
I suppose I go back to that time. I saw the impact of payment on a community in at that moment in time, whereby people were living hand to mouth, Terry. Um, and that really had an impact on me afterwards. Doing my professional qualifications, you know, as an accountant and as a tax consultant, you are given very strong, you know, the equivalent of the Hippocratic Oath in some ways, to say, look, these are how things should be done. And the substance and the form is as important as each other. Doing the right thing to me is a professional value, it's a personal value, but it's the right thing to do. And our old CEO, before he left, he actually talked about, basically, often it's the hardest thing to do. I've also thought that telling the truth is really important. I think if you hide behind fabrication stories, that sort of stuff, then you miss the real point. At the end of the day, the construction industry it can't do it all itself. It needs a supply chain to work with it. And if you're not honest with them, if you don't work with them, Terry, and you don't try and do the right thing, it gets very hard to do. And we can't deliver for our clients. You know, the majority of the income that Kier derives every year comes from the government. So, you know, at the end of the day, so therefore the tax you and I pay, therefore pays into how the government will actually fund the Kier operation through the projects that it contracts us with. So it's really important, basically, that when you put the end-to-end process together, that you try and remove manual intervention, you try and make it as digital as possible, you try and make it as easy as possible to operate, you maximize the use of technology, but you can't ever lose that personal touch to say, I can intervene as needed to make sure we do the right thing. And in some ways, you know, I call it a kind of a 360-degree approach to things, Terry, whereby basically you've got to look at the bigger picture, but you also got to look at the landscape around you as well. You know, many years ago, when I was young, I trained to be a priest, and we did a load of work in Latin. And one of the great Roman generals was a guy called Scipio Africanus. And he always talked about landscape understanding. It's very hard to go into battle when you haven't got the whole remit and what's in front of you. You understand what's in front of you, what's behind you, to the sides of you, and what you've got at that moment in time. And that's very much what I try and do on a day-to-day basis. You got to remember, Terry, I make no money. I build the money, I collect it, and I make sure it gets out to it. So my mortgage and my well-being, my family, is basically dealt with through our front end of our business, our sites and our operations. So I've got to do everything I can professionally, personally and from a value perspective as well, an integrity perspective, to do the right thing.
And of course, you mentioned these 50,000 as this number, and although it's 50,000 people, it's really 50,000 families, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
it's that, you know, they've got wives, they've got children, they've got husbands, etc. So each one of those is a little ecosystem that you're keeping going themselves. So it's not just about doing the right thing because it's the right thing, but it's a good business reason to do it, which is why we call this Good Business Pays, of course, which is you get the talent, you get the buy-in, you get the skills, and you're supporting all of these families as well.
I agree with you. And you know, Terry, like when you look at our supply chain, the tail is as important as the preferred supplier listing. You know, there for us is we have a preferred supplier listing about 225 that we contract a lot with. But Kier's really proud that 60% of the spend comes from the SME community. And, you know, we are a regional organization. We do a lot of work throughout the United Kingdom. So we have some central contracts, but we really focus in, if we're based in, you know, say in Manchester, are there local supply chain in Manchester we can utilize and build relationships with them? And, you know, there is an old Japanese proverb, never share your bed with somebody who doesn't share your dreams. And we are ground down together. We are bound together by, you know, systems and processes and ways of working on our sites. And it's really important that if we want to do our work, we need the supply chain with us. And what's so important then is finding ways to keep them on board, because, you know, the most important thing in a site, Terry, is health and safety. Absolutely health and safety. And you do that through collaboration with your suppliers. And, you know, the simple things about, you know, people turn up on site, if they've been paid to terms and everything's going well and they're a collaborative chain, they want to work with you. And the challenges we faced in 2018 and before that was, you know, that we weren't paying to terms at that moment in time. And we had challenges about collaboration then because, you know, our suppliers were looking at us and going, well, you're not paying me to terms. How do you expect me to turn up on site and do my best job for you at that time?
Mm-hmm. So I've heard you speak many times now at different venues, and I think you're one of the best storytellers around making the payment story real and
Yeah,
human.
thank you.
Because, you know, it can be, we do it at Good Business Pays all the time, and it's quite a boring topic, this payments thing, to a lot of people. You can see them, their eyes drifting off in different
Yeah,
directions when you start talking
yeah.
about. But actually, of course, they're human stories, and you're a great storyteller as it relates to that. I was wondering if you had got some examples of, as it relates to this whole kind of doing the right thing and getting the payments right. You must have some horror stories of where things have gone wrong and your battle to
Yeah,
kind of improve things,
yeah,
and
yeah.
where things have gone right. I wondered if you had a couple to share.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I don't get invited to dinner parties, Terry, right? But if I did, I think I would bore people senseless with some of the efforts over the years. I suppose, look, if we head back maybe to 2018, we were paying at that stage 1 in 9 invoices to terms. That's an awful statistic. And there were after reasons for that. We had been through a fairly difficult system implementation. Um, it was, you know, compliance to the systems were difficult because they were very clunky. We had kind of replicated the past rather than looked into the future at that moment in time. It was a difficult corporate environment. We had a raft of contracts that were significantly loss making and they were threatening the future of Kier. And at that time as well, Carillion's demise put us in the spotlight. Um, if I look back to 2018, this time, I checked my stats last night, Terry, for this. Today in 2018, at 146,710 invoices that hadn't been processed. This morning, I've got 2,500 invoices in the rest of our organization, you know, 8 years on from there. So if you haven't processed those invoices, then people aren't going to be paid, right? How did it manifest itself? Loads of suppliers on stop, sites unable to fulfill project delivery on time, suppliers removing themselves from our PSL, not wanting to work with us. Well-being impact. You know, we at that moment in time, we didn't talk in 2018 about well-being, but those elements were still there at that time, and some quite challenging discussions from suppliers and from trade bodies like yourself and others along the way who were, you know, there. What did it manifest itself into? Stories. Let me think. We had quite a lot of suppliers whereby I would go out on site and talk to them. And I would try and see what we could do to alleviate that immediate pain. If we couldn't get all the payment to them, we were trying to get to see them as to get short-term payments into them and then meet the tail of their spend then. And what we had to do with the businesses is actually say, it's not just about the main suppliers, the PSL. We got to pay everybody here. And we got to do it to terms. And one of the things we started doing was basically taking out some terms that were completely unrepresentative. At that time, some suppliers had agreed to 120 days. And that's just unacceptable. So we removed a load of those and started reducing down the terms as much as possible. I instigated a plan called Drive to 95. What would it do in a short space of time to pay 95% of our invoice to terms? Given that base we were paying 1 and 9, what would it take us to pay, 19 and 20? And so there was a focus therein for ourselves. We got rid of a load of the systems and processes that didn't work. We had a raft of applications, Terry, that just didn't talk to each other, didn't make sense, and they were confusing for suppliers there. One of the other things we tried to do was centralize a lot of stuff to make it easier. If you've got 4 people in charge of something, Terry, who do you point to? Because, when you're in trouble, you have time to find out that when you're in trouble, you hear that analogy, or when you're in trouble, your friends stand behind you. Well, in my life, most times or in business, when I've been in trouble, there's been nobody behind me. But I've wanted people left and right of me, Terry, to face forward and together and to work together. And that came into the supply chain so much more. One of the things that we did find out, basically, we had a lot of suppliers coming onto site and coming to visit in the offices. And I do remember one subcontractor come to the office, and it was close to end of days. They had stayed overnight outside the office. They wanted to speak to us. And if they didn't meet back's payment that day for 10 employees, the company was going to go under. And that was the impact. You said early on, Terry, about families. That was the impact at that moment in time my team and I were having on people. It's not a great place to be. And I think, when you look in the mirror on a regular basis on these times, it was a difficult place to be. Getting that chap to come up board, to sit in the office with us, to process the invoices, because, he was part of the 146,000 that we hadn't processed, right? So, no wonder he hadn't paid, because the invoice wasn't on the system. So getting the invoice on the system, validating it, where's the goods receipt? Because when you're on a site, Terry, goods receipting is an administrative process. But where would most of the goods receipts? Where's the delivery dockets? They're not in the system, because the system's difficult to use. They are, they're in the back of a wagon. They're in the back of a lorry. They are all gathered together for Friday afternoon. They are basically, somebody's written the messages to get that night at home from the shop. Somebody's written a tip for a horse. They're going down to Paddy Power with it, whatever in that line, right? But they're not in the system. So we had to find ways to do that at the same time. But going through that, then once the purchase order was there, which we got better at, and the system there, we were able to pay that guy. And it was a 6-figure sum, Terry. It wasn't a lot of money. It wasn't a small amount. The relief that man had was huge. And the only thing I could say was sorry. I couldn't really say any more to him, Terry. We had caused this to him, and because I couldn't process the invoices, and the cash was constrained at that time, and the processes were clunky, that guy was brought to almost to the end. And to this day, he still works with us. And if there's ever a payment problem, he'll ring me up, or a challenge in a process. But when we moved our technology stack up and got to electronic invoicing, I was one of the first person to ring him and say, look, Tony, I need you to do these things. And if you can't, let me help you through that. That was probably one of the lowest points, Terry, to be fair. And from a value set perspective, when you talk about collaboration and trust and focus, we just weren't doing the right thing. And it also impacted my people, because, at that stage I had nearly 233 people in the end-to-end purchase to pay team. We had 80 people answering phone calls. We were getting 70,000 phone calls a month. We were dropping phones at the time because we just couldn't cope with the volumes that were there. Like last month, we did 4,840 calls, and 3,100 of those is my invoice on the next payment run. So the change in that line was huge. And like, as I said at that time, I don't think we talked about well-being either on site or of our staff, but I really worried about a lot of people. at that moment in time. The pressure was huge on everybody, because at the end of the day, our supply chain had done the work, Terry. They deserve to be paid for it. They deserve to be paid on time. And we should be doing better. So one of the things I wanted to do was basically, right, let's get the systems right. Let's focus on what I can control. Let's find a way to get invoiced in the system. Let's go to two-way match where we have to. Let's find a way of getting the goods receipts in. Let's go out and talk to the sites. Because if you're in an office, right, and you're in kind of an ivory tower, and you got to go out to the sites and go, what does it mean? So we took our people on site, Terry, who'd never been on site before, and said, these are our colleagues in site, the operatives, the site managers, the site project managers, the QSs, quantity surveyors. They're the people who basically bring the money in. So we got to understand how they operate. And if we understand how they operate, let's make solutions that are focused on getting things done at the front end where the back end can support them. A lot of our prior thinking was done in a box in an office going, well, that's perfectly how it should be. And Terry, that was wrong. So there was a bit of reflection on me. And for my 20-odd years in shared services, I threw out the rule book before it. I recognized in construction, and particularly subcontractor, we had to work a different way, a really different way. And it had to be all about site first. Everything was about how we could get the sites to operate, how they could operate faster, quicker, harder, get rid of the process on blocks, unblock the process issues that were there, and also work with procurement as well, because, procurement, we're saying to me, it's got to focus on best price and value rather than rebates or prebates and any of that stuff along the way. We just got to work hand in hand now. So we got a lot better at doing that along the way. But it doesn't stop at the time, Terry. I would rather approach it on a personal base. If there's a problem, I'll go out and do something about it. And that will be the core to it all. I'll really go out and do something about it. And great example, we've done a wonderful project in Glasgow, and it was a historical renovation. And there's only two suppliers to do some specific work on that historical renovation. And there were challenges with the supplier. And the Office of the Small Business Commissioner rang me up, and Jackie said to me, Dan, we've got a challenge in there. The suppliers come to us. What are you going to do about it? And I says, give me an hour. And I rang the office in Glasgow, and I said, what's up, guys? And they said, woof. And I lived in Glasgow for 18 years, and, we could have a very open and straight chat. And it's my favorite city in the world, Terry, right? And we had a fairly open chat. And I says, I'll tell you what, guys, I'm in the car. And I got up to Glasgow, and we sat with the guys and we said, what's the issue? And it was effectively a breakdown on relationships between the two. And I effectively did a Henry Kissinger mode, right? I rang the supplier and said, I'm really sorry about this. This sits at our door. We need you to do this, but we need to work with you. So we brought the two parties together, and effectively it was around the sign-off of the work that had been done and the payment process around it all. And what we were able to do then, Terry, at that stage was work directly. And within 24 hours, we had a solution. We really had a solution that was so much better along the way. And that solution was so important because what it directly meant was, number one, I could go back to Jackie in the Office Small Business Commission and said, I take seriously when somebody makes a complaint. I own it personally. The same thing when things don't go right here at home. My wife said to me, Dan, that didn't go to plan. I own it. There's no point basically ducking behind, well, the kids didn't do it or the dogs were there, whatever. It was my fault. I then basically said to Jackie, I'll sort it. And give me 24 hours. Because you know what? I genuinely believe that by bringing people together and working together, I think we can find ways around it all. Now, that project basically was delayed due to COVID and the element around it all. But I passed that project now. My son lives in Glasgow, and I passed that project when I go up and see them. And if I go to Hampden to go see Celtic basically in the Cup final in 2 weeks' time, I'm going to walk by it and see what's like. And I feel very proud. I feel very proud that we've delivered a wonderful piece of work at the front end. I feel very proud that the supply chain responsible were treated fairly and respectfully. And I feel very proud that the value set of Kier, which is about collaboration, trusted and focused, worked. Because we've done other projects like that, and that supplier has stayed in the journey with us. And what's the most important thing is, when we look at our customer feedback, 93% of people continuously come back to Kier over and over again because of what we do. And some of the work we do is mind-boggling. We're part of Glasgow at the moment, Terry. a £998 million project for replacement of H&P Barlinnie into H&P Glasgow. That's going to build a huge amount of social value in a part of Glasgow that's a bit deprived. It's going to build a huge amount of apprenticeships and people coming to the table. And across a 54-acre site, we're going to make a difference to how people are incarcerated and the terms and conditions they have and how they are treated fairly in the 21st century. And these are really important things along the way. And during COVID, I actually got to the end point. I'd look across it all and the home, and I thought COVID was a great time for reset for many. But during COVID, for Kier as an organisation, we had an opportunity to put the great back in Great Britain. A real proud element that we were able to continue working during that period of time. For a lot of stuff we were doing, we were working on fixing the highways, working on our water treatment plants, keeping the country going. And I'm really proud of that. And that's what I know keeps a load of our people going, Terry, is that we make a difference so often to the communities we live in, and therefore the payment of it all. And as you said early on, if there's 50,000 families that are impacted by Kier, what are we doing about giving them the best opportunities for themselves, that on a weekend when they switch off themselves, they are getting enjoyment out of their lives as it all, because we all work hard, Terry.
Well, I think one of the very really interesting things about what you've been talking about is the human element in this whole story, because I know that you're a great supporter of things like electronic invoicing and technology. However, the examples that you've given, I think, probably point us towards, as we get more technology in to speed up payments, what is then the role of the humans that are part of that? What's the
Yeah,
human element in this
yeah.
process? What would you say is the most important human elements to this?
So first of all, Terry, you're absolutely right. So step back a moment. The construction industry has always had the human element to the core of it, but it has struggled with because of the element of the element of traditional, what I call the macho industry, and that's manifested itself in the amount of people who work in construction industries who commit suicide. I've worked with a guy called Trevor Stevens. Basically Trevor Stevens. Trevor played with England. He was a Everton basic player, Rangers in Glasgow. And Trevor has worked with Causeway Technologies to create an organization called Mindflow, which is all about going out and talking on site and taking people from the world of football. Paul Stewart, who lives very close to me here in Blackpool, Paul Lake, Trevor himself, going out and talking about that it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to recognize that the industry is tough. And if you've done 30 years on the site, you've done some shift and some effort. And it's okay to go out that. And so that mindfulness and that people element's really there and there. And I think the construction industry has really embraced that more and more. From the end-to-end process part, Terry, if I look at the front line, technology has a huge part to play, as you know, right? Because in the past, construction was ever seen as traditional, similar to things like mining and steelworks and those natures. We still use the same building methods we used in the pyramids in 4600 BC, like shovels and water management techniques. A lot of people look at construction as old school, and you know what? If you give a dog a bad name, it's going to be treated with there. And when other industries have gone ahead with technology, construction was perceived as being behind. What we've found now, basically, I think more and more, is that technology developments are really at the cutting edge. I go to sites a lot, right? And they are transforming themselves from where they are 5 years ago to where they'll be now 5 years from now. Every day I'm seeing new ways of operating that make sites safer, Terry, makes them much more effective and efficient from BIM, modeling, carbon management, project delivery tools. And I believe construction is really pushing the envelope here. Also, as well as that, image-wise, construction is much more inclusive now. The role of women, diverse communities are significantly, and well-being significantly recognized more and more in that line. But the end-to-end process, where your kind of real queries come into there, that focuses in on what goes on at the front end, in the site office itself, and what's at the back end. We're seeing huge technology advances in the front end in terms of its safety and elements there. In the offices, we want the office management, the office administration, just to focus on the sites. And my role and my thinking is about how do we make it as easy as possible using technology in the site offices to allow them to just not worry about paper or anything of that nature and worry about site management and all the good stuff that they do there. Because the more focused there, the easier to do that. So what we're doing a lot of is the role of the back-end process. So when you say to yourself, onboarding for a lot of organizations, it didn't matter whether you were an organization that did 50 grand a year or 5 million with somebody, you went through the same onboarding process. So what we're doing in Kier is we're a really tiered, stepped onboarding process. Depending on how much you're going to spend with us, we'll go through different levels of governance to take you through there. But we will make sure that when you're on board in Kier and on the process and projects you're working on, you've got the right accreditation, the right ways of working, and you have the right terms of trade, which you want and we want with you. And that's really important, Terry. So the second thing is once you're onboarded, right, what do we do then about getting your invoices in? 86% of all invoices come into Kier come through a portal now. The other 14% come through basically PDFs are sent to us by email. And we read those details and get them in the system. So that means within one day, rather than what was probably 7 to 10 days traditionally, say 10 years ago, the invoices are in the system. If the invoice in the system, I then check them, are they ready to be paid? Have they got a purchase order? Have they got a goods receipt? If they have, we match them. They go off then onto the payment run as based on the terms. If they haven't, we get our exception handlers to work that through. Where I see this going forward, Terry, with technology, is I believe by 2030, in the back offices and the support structures to help the business that play there, there'll be 2 people working at 2 roles. One will be an exception handler, because by and large, in the next number of years, the way the industry works, I believe that people will get very, very good at submitting their invoices right first time. And based on cheaper technologies, easier and smaller accounting systems, the guy on the ground who is either a 5-person team or a 20-person team, right the way up to a 1,000 organization, it will be easier to do business. What that means from us is when the invoices come in electronically, and this is coming, as we know anyway, Terry, as part of 2029 anyway, as part of making tax digital, I believe then that there's going to be a significant amount of them are going to be right first time. They won't need to be touched at all. The Amazon effect, I think. So what you have then, these small elements that can't be managed and that don't go through right first time, I have a role for that called an exception handler. And that person will work with the supplier, understand why, and run a routine and say, how many times has this happened in the last year? How many times has it happened the last month? How many times, if you've submitted 100 invoices and if 70% of them have blocked, there must be a reason why. And that exception handler's got to work hand in hand, collaborative with the supplier and figure out why. Because what the supplier doesn't want to do, if they send it in to us, they want to know it's in there and it gets sorted. That role is the first role. I don't see any roles anymore for AP invoice processors or administrators. I think those days are gone very soon. The second role for me is going to be what I call the knowledge expert. And that's the person who's constantly trying to drive the technological side, trying to make sure, running the routines, using effectively agentic AI at the moment, which will do it for you. So I'll give you a great example. Our auditing purposes, our expense claims that come in from our staff, we do about 50,000 expense claims a year. And our robots basically audit 48,000 of those. They use 74 different action words, search elements, and they do that for us. And a team of 12 is now a team of 2. But I'll tell you what's happened as well. Right first time, 98.8% of all expense claims that come in from our people into Kier are right first time. Because what we're doing is the exception handler is able to take the data from the knowledge expert to say, right, these guys, they haven't, and ladies, they've not submitted right, you go sort it out with them and try and build that right first time culture. Because in reality, what we need to be, we don't need to be seen in the back offices anymore. People need to trust us that when they interact with us, we've got the detail and it's on its way to get paid. And as you've been championed for years, it's on its way to get paid as soon as possible and to the best of our ability. And that's where I see this going forward. And Terry, we're already on the way in that. I spent 2 days, on the last 2 days, with my own management team working. What does 2030 look like? How do we basically drive in the last year? What was effectively robotics in the early 2020s, the role of AI, the role of co-pilot, all these things, I believe, will have a transformational impact and it's there for everybody to use. You don't need to have, if you want to use ChatGPT or others for £150 a year, it will help you do so much. And I've been working with a local supplier here who has struggled with somebody else, in a small construction company, and using a small search engine of this nature and an AI, this construction company, which he's a subby into somebody, he's only got 5 people. He's got 4 diggers himself, and his wife does the books at home with him. I've been able to work with him over the weekends, whereby they use agentic AI to drive their invoicing, get it in, and do all the checking. And what that means to him and the wife, they don't have to work Saturdays and Sundays now in administration. But what it means as well, it means that the invoices are going in right first time, which means there's no issue about getting payment elsewhere, Terry. That's the art of the possible. And we in construction have got to embrace this like no tomorrow.
And the beauty of all these things that you've talked about, of course, and I've been saying this for a few years now, is that all these changes and improvements have been driven without any change in regulation at all whatsoever. There is no law that's been brought in, no regulation that has been strengthened that has forced you, if that's the right word, to change anything. It's all been good business reasons for doing it, right, as well as right reasons.
Yes. And Terry, to be fair, right, look, let's be honest, right, if you want to be a government contractor, they're very clear. You pay your supply chain to terms. There's no excuse in that. And it's absolutely right. And as one of 39 strategic suppliers to the UK government, we got to make sure we're doing that to the best of our ability. There'll always be reasons why things don't go to plan, but the excuses are getting less and less, to be fair. And as part of the digital world, it's going to get there faster and quicker. And I do think that basically, the old prompt payment code, which was had elements of toothlessness, but it had very strong focus because, if you weren't on the prompt payment code, you could not tender for work over 5 million with the government. And that focused people in like no tomorrow. It really, really did. And I think for a lot of the construction industry, and I can speak for talking to others of mine variety and over there through it all as well, it got it up the line very quickly. And I do believe that, where I have been very vocal internally talking about this, if we don't have a supply chain that doesn't work with us and we don't pay to terms, then we won't exist.
And I'm guessing that there must have been some battles over the years you've had with colleagues to drive that change. Yeah. But I'm understanding now, I expect they really get the value of what I would call good business partnering, not just good business paying, I expect now.
Yeah. And so going back, the prompt payment code was a misnomer. In some ways, it wasn't about prompt payment. It was just paying, just getting it done and getting it done to the terms that were there. You're absolutely right, because they'll always, when you have, and at many times when the funds was limited at times, we had to determine which was the best way of doing it. And I've always been a proposal of let the data make the decisions. Let's get the data out there. Let's get the detail out there. Here is basically our supply chain. Here is based their terms to trade. What are we doing about maximizing those payment details for what we have at this moment in time? And that's grown significantly. And, there have been professional differences and personal differences. But I go back again, at the end of the day, you just got to do the right thing. And often it's the hardest thing to do. But what's happened now, bit by bit, and you're right, there was no legislation there. But what we had was, very strong leaders in Andrew Davis and in Simon Keston, CFO, and followed up by Stuart Togwell and Tom Hinton, our new CEO and CFO duo. They are very, very strong about supply chain payments. They get it. Like Stuart Togwell has been, I think 30 years in the construction industry. He's seen it from right the way through to where it is now. And what I love talking to Stuart about, he's passionate about just do the right thing, Dan. And he's very vocal. He's very visible about this at this moment in time. And it's not just that. Sophie Timms, who works with the government and all that, she's very clear when we work with the Cabinet Office that we are transparent, we explain what's going on, and we set ourselves out there. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with basic setting ourselves out, and then that's where we want to be. And if that's our North Star, Terry, let's go for it. We mightn't always get there, but let's go with good intent along the way. And I think those conversations have got much less now. If I go back maybe 5-6 years ago, there were a lot of them. They were regular. But I can think in the last month, say, I've had 2 conversations about payments. And of note that I would feel had to be had with parts of the organization to work there.
And getting towards the end now, what advice would you have for others that are in your kind of role in other large organizations, but not nearly as far along the journey as you've got? Because the new regulations are going to sharpen people's pencils a little bit around doing some of this stuff. What are the 2 or 3 tips that you might have for others in your kind of role in other large organizations if they're well behind where you are and they want to get towards that?
There's no magic dust, this stuff, Terry, right? Um, I've learned from others along the way, and I've learned from other industries. Beg, borrow, and steal. Come towards us. Talk to people like myself and others out there. I'll tell you the truth. I'll tell you how we've done it. I'll also tell you how we got it wrong, which is always good, because I think sometimes people and you're right, Terry, and one of the reasons I think that I connect with so many people, I actually explain in a nice way what actually really happens, because it actually allows you to really understand. I think so many times you go to conference and presentations and people tell you how many things went well, right? Rather than going, actually, here's where we've got to. And I'm so proud of where we've got to, because we were so far behind along the way. And you wouldn't want anybody to go through that a lot of again, but you'd want to take the learning. So the scars on my back are visible and known to others and how they can utilize it there. So number one, beg, borrow, steal, find from others. Secondly, read the legislation, understand it all. Let's talk about it. Maximum payment terms, more public accountability, removals of retentions, the payment of interest, the role of the small business commissioner. All the work that you've done, other lobbyists, the trade bodies have really paid off. And it's no more good and bad guys. We all have to be the good guys. And the third thing, set a plan. It won't all go to plan, but stick to it. They're the 3 things, Terry. Number one, beg, borrow, steal. Go talk to those who've done it. Listen to them. Secondly, read the legislation, understand it, understand what it means for your organization, and then set out the plan and stick to it. And look, I'm going to throw a 4th one into you. It's leadership, Terry. Leadership, I call it JED-IP, judgment, knowing what to do, edge, knowing when to do it, D, the drive to get it done, I, influence, and bringing everybody with you, all underpinned by people. So if you're a Star Wars fan, JED-IP for you there to bring it together.
Well, Dan, I would say that you are not only a thought leader in this place, but an action leader. And I would encourage anyone in leadership to beg, borrow, or steal some of your time, as we have today on the Weight Watchers show. And I thank you for that. It's been an education and an inspiration. Thanks, Dan, for being with us today.
No, thanks, and thanks so much. And again, Terry, if anybody out there wants to contact us, and please feel free. Again, knowledge is shared, and knowledge shared is knowledge powerful. Thank you so much, folks.